Hello and welcome to this new episode of the EuropeChats. Today we're going to talk about the year 2024, which will be a momentous year, first because of the many challenges the EU faces, but also because we'll have European Parliament elections and we will have a changeover of the institutional composition of the various institutions. We'll have a new Parliament, we'll have a new Commission, we'll have a new President of the European Council. Now, there will be one important moment in June 2024, because the European Council will adopt what we call a new strategic agenda for the years 24 to 29, setting out the political direction where the Union is headed. In order to understand what this means and how it will happen, I have invited a senior official from the Belgian future presidency, Deputy Director General Wouter Detavernier, and a member of the so-called think tank community, Richard Youngs from Carnegie Europe. He's also a member of our board. Welcome, Wouter, and welcome, Richard. Let me start, Wouter. I'll ask the same question to the two of you to start with. Why does the European strategic agenda matter, and what is it meant for?
Well, it is meant for, it's a kind of a to-do list that from the European Council to the new incoming Commission, in which it is asked what the Commission has to focus on, because what are the priorities that it should work on. So this is mainly what it means. It has been created after the Lisbon Treaty, and it's now, I think, the third agenda that will be established. But we expect that this agenda will be quite important because the times are really challenging, and normally this agenda sets out the kind of general things you can expect. The 2019 agenda was very much focused on a description of what Europe should focus on, based on the green, the digital, energy. This kind of policies. We think that this time there will be an extra layer that we'll have to look at, because there are three topics that will really determine the next 5 years of the European functioning and working, which are enlargement, linked to that in parallel the internal reforms we will have to look at, and then the multi-financial framework, and there is a new round, and we know that this becomes more and more difficult to land. Last time we needed 4 days to find an agreement, and we don't expect it to be more easy. So we think that these topics have to be reflected some way or another into the new strategic agenda, and it will not be an easy task, because you feel that with the incoming European elections that leaders are cautious, but leaders will have to determine that agenda. Of course, at the moment they do and they approve, elections will be behind us, and probably it will be important to focus on what the citizen expects also from the European Union, which is a stronger economy. We have had the Green Deal. I think we need also to look at a kind of industrial deal, where we are able to reindustrialize and to look at more independence of the European Union in that sense. We'll have to look at what I would call the safety of the citizens. This is very, very important. And then, of course, I immediately think about social and health issues. I think about migration, how to manage migration also at an external level. And then, thirdly, we will have to look at the future of the European Union and the aspects I just mentioned. This is how we think the next strategic agenda will be shaped, and looks quite challenging.
I'm sure it looks challenging listening to you. The program is absolutely overwhelming. Richard?
Yes, I agree with Wouter that I think the strategic agenda can be extremely important. It's setting the medium-term guidelines for European policies, and I think this strategic agenda will be particularly important. The two previous versions also came in challenging times. They also came at moments when there are a huge number of really pressing challenges. But I think this agenda will have something different about it, which is that over the last 4 or 5 years, the EU has been dealing with a number of short-term, immediate crises. It's had to deal with those crises. It's been in crisis mode. We all know that. In many senses, it's done a good job with the COVID pandemic, with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the migration issue, and other crises. But it does mean that almost by necessity, the EU has had to develop its policies in a rather ad hoc nature. And I think now is a good time to take a step back, take stock, and make sure that the way in which the EU is dealing with these immediate crises is compatible with its longer-term visions. And I think in that sense, it will be particularly helpful and important at this particular juncture for the strategic agenda to set this medium-term vision for the next 5 years.
Thank you very much. I very much agree with what you said about the kind of new way of approaching things, drawing the lessons from what has happened over the years. Because we've managed the crisis quite well, but we have, as you said, we have improvised. Now I think we have to have a more systematic approach. Now, in order to do this, Wouter, if I may come back to you, how do you see the Belgian presidency helping prepare this European Council? As we know, post-Lisbon, the rotating presidency no longer chairs the European Council, and yet the rotating presidency has a role to play in preparing this. So can you tell us a bit about that?
Yes, I fully agree with how you pinpoint issues. Our role is relatively sober, but everyone looks to us on shaping the whole topic. And so, let's start by saying that, of course, the decision on the strategic agenda and how it looks like is in the hand of the leaders. They will determine the shape and the content. We could try to do our best if we look how we can articulate between the General Affairs Council, which we will preside, and the European Council. But of course, overall, it will be the European Council that will decide. We will try to look at how we can listen to member states. I think that's one of our central roles. How can we listen to member states, and how can we help shaping the whole debate? That is a debate that will, of course, continue during the Belgian presidency, but will overlook the next years, the years to come. When you see in the Declaration of Grenada, there are already 6 topics that are identified in the strategic agenda. I think about security, energy, migration, the involvement in the world. Well, I should say that they coincide very much with the priorities of the Belgian presidency. And so we will try to, for each of these topics, to have an input. When I look, for instance, at the social pillar, we want to focus. We will organize several summits. One will be together with the Commission. Another one will be by their own presidency. But the intention of it is that it will somehow be mirrored in the strategic agenda at the end. Another topic is security for us. And you see the citizens is really expect the European Union to be more robust. We will try to, as you know, to finalize, of course, the Migration Pact, which is a difficult topic. We are almost there, but you know, the summit, the last meters are the most intense and most difficult. So we will try, but we also want to shape it with a more broader element, how the European Union has to work together with third countries. So these topics on how we work with African countries and other parts of the world has to be reflected into the whole discussion on migration. This will come back during our presidency. Then, and then of course there is the economic part. You hear everywhere that Europe has to become more competitive, and that we have to do better and do more with the internal market that has all brought us so much prosperity and development, but that is sometimes in danger. If you see how it is sometimes a little bit challenged. So we would like to see how we can strengthen this internal market, and therefore we have asked the former Italian Prime Minister Letta to make a report especially on the functioning on the internal market. And so we hope that this will steer the discussion on this at the March summit, which is traditionally economic oriented.
Okay, Wouter, what I like very much in your answer is, and it's important for the viewers to realize that in the European Union, not one institution does things. It's the interplay between the institutions. And that is why the Belgian presidency chairing the Council has a key role to play, like the Commission, like the European Parliament in many ways, in preparing, helping the leaders shape the agenda. And of course, one of the leaders will be the Belgian Prime Minister, who during the presidency has a bit of special role within the European Council. Let me turn to Richard again. Richard, you have been the mastermind behind the recent TEPSA recommendations, which is our way of trying to influence a bit the future agenda. Can you tell us a bit about what those recommendations are about and how we do them?
So TEPSA members across Europe have a great deal of expertise, academic and think tank expertise, and we've tried to channel this expertise into the presidency in the most useful way possible. Normally the recommendations pick up on a few themes that are most pressing to the agenda of each presidency, and the call for most immediate decisions to be taken. Because the strategic agenda falls under the Belgian presidency, with this we try to take a step back and look at some of these bigger overarching questions and offer some constructive ideas of how they might be channeled into the exact way in which the strategic agenda is defined. So we've looked, as Wouter was saying, at these big security issues, both defense-related security issues, but also the economic security and citizen security issues, the migration pact, and of course the enlargement issue that will have to advance during the next 4 or 5 year period. And what we've tried to do is say, clearly these are the big priorities, and a lot of the difficult politics of the next institutional term will revolve around the priorities, how the Council sets priorities and deals with the tensions and trade-offs that will inevitably have to be made between these different priorities. So with these recommendations, we've tried to look over the medium and longer term at some of these big issues that I think will define the solidity of the European project over the next 4 or 5 years. And as I say, use some of our expertise in members across Europe to try and help the Belgian presidency through the thicket of defining the next strategic agenda.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I think the think tank world has a lot to offer, provided we manage to establish the right link with the practitioners. It's not something which you do somewhere in outer space. You have grand ideas and no one listens to them. So I think that is what we try to do at TEPSA. Now, the two of you have already, to a large extent, anticipated my next question, which basically is, again, to highlight the really key issues you want us to see. I think, Wouter, you've already done it in many ways. I think, Richard, you also mentioned the various elements of. Would you like to add something about this in terms of substance before we go to the next question?
Well, I think what people ask me all the time is how we want to shape the debate on the future of Europe, of the European Union. And as I said, I think what we will try to do is to be of a help for what will be decided at the European Council. And in that, from that point of view, we are planning to look at the 3 important aspects of that question. The first one is about policies. What do we really want to do together? What we will have to focus more on and less on. Then we will organize something on the future of the MFF. That's about the budget. That will be together with the Commission. And another seminar will focus more on the institutional part, how the European Union has what it has to do to stay fit and to be able to be a reliable partner also throughout the world. But these, of course, will be seminars, expert level topics. When it will come at a more political level, we will use, as I said before, the General Affairs Council and try to articulate somehow with what will happen afterwards in the European Council. We are aware that ultimately it is up to the European Council and the leaders. These questions are that important but we want to, as you do, as TEPSA and other think tanks, we are living challenging times, and we have to be creative and look and use all citizens and all institutions, also member states, how we can help shaping this broad agenda.
Richard, I want to come back to you with the question. In the chapeau which you wrote with Miriam Potinashvili to the recommendations, you said something which struck me, that Europe must do things differently in view of the enormity of the challenges. What exactly do you mean by that, and how should we do this?
So our report identifies many of the same priorities. I think we're probably in agreement of the big issues, the big challenges in the EU that will have to be part of the strategic agenda. But we try to make a more overarching argument, which is this: the big challenge for the EU in a more structural way is to strike the right balance between dealing with immediate crises on the one hand and planning for longer term reform on the other hand. That may seem a very trite and obvious point, but actually getting that balance right in decision making is quite difficult. And it's clear that the EU has had to deal with these short-term crises. It will have to continue dealing with them over the next 4 or 5 years. But it needs to make sure that while it is dealing with events in Ukraine and other immediate crises, it doesn't dig itself into such a crisis mode that precludes the longer-term thinking that will be necessary over the next 4 or 5 years. So it's in that sense that we call for things to be done slightly differently. And we make the argument in that sense that the strategic agenda needs to not simply list individual areas of policy that we know will be important, but open the way to more of a qualitative rethink in the way that things like security are being approached, exactly how the enlargement process is likely to unfold, the very tricky relationship between the Migration Pact and the EU's aspirations to geopolitical power and building partnerships with third countries. So we find there the kind of nexus between all these different issues is where some of the difficult decisions will have to be made, and that will determine the success of the next strategic agenda.
I mean, just listening to you, I'm just thinking about the way the union normally functions, and we struggle to be strategic. We struggle. We do lots of good things, but it's very piecemeal very often. And I think over the last years, with the crisis we've gone through, and now those mega crises today, Ukraine, they're all linked. And you need a more general strategic outlook. I think that's a very important point. But there's also another point I'd like to make, and I ask first Wouter about this. It's all very nice to have pieces of paper. We're very good at that. I mean, we write conclusions, we have strategic agendas, we have all of that. The problem sometimes is, how do you translate that into reality? How do you implement it and all that? And I was wondering whether you had started a bit from think tank and practitioners' position. What should be done in order to make this rather general document? It will not be a very detailed document by nature because it fixes the strategic orientations. But what should the leaders do to make sure that it actually happens over the next years? Wouter, do you have any ideas on that?
Well, this is that's a general challenge the European Union faces since many years. We decide on many topics. Implementation of it sometimes can be slow or can be. So we have to probably, in our opinion, we have to look at 2 parts: the proper implementation, and this is, in our opinion, it has always been a duty of the Commission, and the Commission in the last 5 years has been very much focused on the new challenges, and it was actually challenged by the situation, the war in Ukraine, the COVID crisis, all this. We didn't think about it when we wrote the last strategic agenda, but it has maybe lost a little bit the main focus that it had in the past, which was on implementation of what we decide to do. So there we think there is something specific for the next Commission that can be looked at. And we'll have to find a creative way of how to. I also think that the respect for the decision of the internal market and the functioning of the internal market that has been challenged quite a bit in the last years could receive some more attention, not only from the Commission, but also and mainly from the Commission. And then, of course, the second topic is how to speed up. You also mentioned it, that we have to make a distinction between the short term and the longer term. It is clear that sometimes we are not we are lacking behind in how we can implement things. And there we think that we should look at the issue. This is a topic that is not new, what is called better regulation, and also the administrative burden. That's something you hear very often, that where the United States are very strong, in Europe is quite slow. So this is something you hear it both from citizens and member states that we really have to tackle and look into. And this is something for the next years to handle.
Yes, you make a very good point, and that is that the strategic agenda asks the what question. What should we do? And that is for the leaders collectively. Incidentally, the President of the Commission sits in the European Council district. I agree with you that maybe the main task of the Commission is less to say what we should do, but it's to do how to do it. That's how the Commission has a lot of influence and is the only one who can actually do this. I think that's a very important point. Richard, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I'd make more of an analytical point that I think is very interesting, Jim, that the criticism of the EU was always that it was, as you say, it was good at setting strategic documents, very general sense, and it was very bad at responding to concrete crises, implementing things on the ground. In a way, I think over the last decade, that's almost changed around, that the EU hasn't done a bad job, it seems to me, of being quite pragmatic and responding to many crises, perhaps without complete success. We all know the criticisms, but in a way, it has shown some flexibility with the economic crisis, the migration issue, the pandemic, so on and so forth, all these economic security issues. And it seems to me that what the agenda needs to do is to kind of get back to setting some guidelines that make sure that these immediate ad hoc crisis responses are actually trying to channel towards a longer-term vision, which seems to me lacking over the last 4 or 5 years, a vision towards which all these crisis responses are heading, which I realize doesn't answer your question of how we make sure the agenda is actually implemented. Perhaps that's where TEPSA and other think tank institutes will have a role in monitoring, perhaps coming up with suggestions for indicators. Some indicators, as you were suggesting, Wouter, that where we could identify steps that would go against the strategic agenda if the governments are setting these targets and aspirations, and then they are acting in ways that are directly contrary to their own set interests and aspirations. Probably we ought to be able to define indicators that pick that tension up and hold governments to account.
That would be an innovation on the part of the think tanks, because the think tanks also like to very often say, what should we do, and then have grand ideas. But this is an interesting one. I think of something else which the European Council classically does, but which I would this time even hope they would do in the margins of adopting the strategic agenda, is immediately do some tasking and say, for instance, I don't know, I mean, one of the ideas I would have would be to say, we talk about autonomy, capacity to act, resilience. Why don't we ask the Commission over the next 5 years to look at every single of our policies and do up a kind of bilan, like Monet did? Where do we have assets which we can use and leverage? Where do we have missing elements or missing materials or missing resources? And what can we do for this? How can we bridge the gap? I think that would be something, what do you think, Wouter, that the European Council could, at the same time as setting the orientations, also give some hints at how to do this. Would you agree?
I fully agree with you. I truly hope that there might be some next or Jean Monnet kind of personality, because we really need to think in a creative and out of the box way on how we can shape things in a balanced and more different way. And if you look at the way he handled this, is that with his new commissioners, I think he was somewhere. He invited them in a chateau in which they were discussing for like a few days on how Europe should be shaped and what was really important for the future and to be done. They have taken incredible decisions that really made of the European Union the success we all consider it to be even today. And I very much agree with you what you said also on the more balanced approach, which is helpful. So this is, I think, what we definitely need. And if this could be done both by European Council and Commission, would be because they have to guide and lead, and it needs this kind of insightness.
That brings me to already my last question, but you wanted to add something to this?
No, I was just saying I agree with that. And I think that approach of kind of tasking, subtasking, could deal with something important, which could be that could help avoid the situation where the strategic agenda gets too overladen with detail. So it keeps it free to identify, well, what we're saying, what's really important, where do we want to be heading, what is the EU likely to look like, what should it look like in 2030, 2040. So it sets a really kind of clear vision, which by definition can't get into the detail, but then we kind of come down, it could open the way to coming down a level into the more detailed policy considerations as well.
This brings me, thank you very much, Richard. This brings me to my last question, my final question. Both of you have talked about setting out strategic orientations, the big themes, where should the Union be headed and all of that. So my question to you is, on a personal level, what is your personal dream for the EU to be? What should the EU look like in 2030 and 2040? Maybe Richard first and then Wouter.
It would be a union of 33, 35 members. It would be a union based on a more flexible model of integration. It would be a union that has made progress in defining what it means to be a geopolitical power with more detail. It would be a union more effective in securing stability around its borders. But perhaps most importantly, it would be a union much more capable of defending democratic norms amongst its own members, and within which principles of the green transition have been really effectively mainstreamed across all other areas of policy, because we know that's the big generational existential challenge on which the EU has made quite a significant degree of progress, but it seems to be still needs to be put at the center of everything the EU does, the very rationale for the European project over the next 20, 30 years.
Thank you very much. Wouter.
Well, in my opinion, I think it should be ideally a union that is more assertive than it is today. We have to, by that time, be able to identify and defend better than we do today our own interests in a world that is much more now led by hard politics. We should not go into that trap. We have to start from our own strength, and our own strength is the international rules-based order, the rule of law. These open and diverse societies that have brought peace and security and prosperity in our societies. This is what we really have to build on and start on, and just by thinking how we can defend it better at the international level in a more assertive way. And people call it now geopolitics, but it's much more focused on, we have been focused in the last 75 years on the European Union internally. We now have to find our place in the world. Everyone or every citizen is expecting this leading role by the European Union. And I think that we will have to, ideally, we look into a world where the United Nations also have been shifted in its composition, and where not only Europe, but also other parts of the world play an integral part of. This is necessary if we want to play the role, but we should be an assertive and attractive union that we are today, and that we will stay if we believe in each other. We should not be afraid. We have everything in us to make this shift a reality.
Thank you very much. That's a very nice conclusion. With this, we will conclude today's Europe Chat. I would like to very warmly thank our interlocutors for what I thought was a highly interesting way of looking at the future, at the challenges for the European Union. There will be another Europe Chat shortly before the end of the year, which will be devoted to the issue of EU sanctions, particularly against Russia, but not only. We will try to understand what is going on and how they're being implemented. So please stay tuned in to TEPSA. Thank you very much.